The Texas House of Representatives passed a bill requiring public schools to display the Ten Commandments. Texas Republicans hailed the bill as a way for students to recognize America's foundational moral heritage. But Texas Democrats criticized the legislation as nothing more than a promotion of Judeo-Christian religious favoritism. The bill now heads back to the Texas Senate for approval. Here with the latest is Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who earlier this year was tapped by President Trump to chair the Religious Liberty Commission. Lieutenant Governor Patrick, welcome back to Washington Watch. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Tony. Always great to see you and be with you.
Well, you made this bill a priority for this legislative session. Next door in my home state of Louisiana, Governor Jeff Landry signed the bill into law last year. Texas, I think Arkansas also is pursuing something similar to this. Why is this important?
Well, first of all, and it was Senate Bill 10, so the perfect number for the 10 Commandments we passed several months ago and finally got through the House and back. And by the way, Tony, we actually had some Democrat support on this bill out of the Senate. It was unanimous by Republicans. About a third of the Democrats voted for it, so not as much on the other side. But this is important because it's part of our history. It's part of who we are as a nation. It's part of why we were founded. And by the way, that's the reason the Supreme Court really ushered this in for us, because the Bremerton case back in 2022 overturned cases before that had prohibited this. So think about this. In Texas, we have 5.5 million kids in public schools. We have about 8,000, 8,500 campuses, 1,200 school districts. So in every classroom, we're going to have the 10 Commandments. And the way it's set up, Tony, is we don't have an unfunded mandate. What we do is simply say anyone who wants to donate a 16 by 20 framed 10 Commandment, you can take it to the school, and they are required to put it in the classroom. So what we hope are that churches, businesses, individuals will go to their local schools and say, how many classrooms do you have? 50? Here are 50 10 Commandments, and you are required to put it on. So in every classroom in Texas, they're going to see the 10 Commandments, and they're going to know about God.
You know, Governor, this is something I mentioned at the beginning of the program. It was 60 years ago that prayer in the Bible was taken out of our schools. It really launched the moral majority I think it was in March of 1984. That was at the pinnacle where they tried to get a constitutional amendment through to require prayer school. It failed in the United States Senate. But here we are 40 years after that, and we see a vibrant effort in states across the nation to bring back an understanding of this foundational moral truth that really founded and has guided this nation.
Yeah, and also, Tony, this session we have a bill that's passed to put prayer back in public school in a private time. So individuals will have that right to have a private moment of prayer in school. You know, a few years ago, it wasn't that long ago, really before the last election, that I think we thought we lost our culture in this country. We lost our faith foundation. Look, the last administration was attacking Christians primarily, but all faiths, attacking religious liberty in this country. And then November happened, and Donald Trump came into office, and the president and I talked about this religious liberty presidential commission that I'm chairing with such notables as Cardinal Timothy Dolan, Franklin Graham, Dr. Phil, who's a solid Christian, and Franklin Graham, and so let's see, Ben Carson, Eric Metaxas. So this is an outstanding committee I have. I feel like a pair of brown shoes in a room full of tuxedos with the scholars and the clergy that I have with me. But I think we're taking our country back, Tony. And this president, as I said in the Rose Garden on National Prayer Day, no one has invoked the name of Jesus more than this president. And, you know, I believe, and as I believe the president believes, that, you know, there's this saying, Tony, that no one should get between a doctor and a patient, but we believe no one should get between God and a believer, or God and a seeker. So our Presidential Liberty Commission, I think, is an outpouring of what you're seeing around the country. We are taking this country back on God's word, and our commission is for all faiths. You know, we respect all faiths, but we are a primarily Judeo-Christian country. And so that's the magnificent inheritance that we were given by our founders, and it's time for America to reclaim it again.
And I think it's appropriate that we begin looking at our schools, which have been the source of the indoctrination from the left for the last several decades. And what we're seeing is with each successive generation about a 10% decline in identification with Christianity. So I think exposing kids to these moral truths is going to be absolutely critical. There's another piece of legislation which you've been supportive of there in Texas, which is called the release time. And it simply allows students an hour or two a week to be released to go to a faith-based church or something that would be able to share the gospel with them. What's the status of that bill?
I will check with my staff right now where we are on the bill. We're down to the last 36 hours, so it's a rush of hundreds of bills crossing our path. Hopefully, I'll find out before we get off the air.
Yeah, I think it's passed. I think it's passed the Senate, and I think it's over in the House. I think coming back.
House.
Yeah, I think it may be coming back to the Senate, but it's another one of those good bills. It simply allows the faith community to be engaged in the process.
Well, you were one of the ones who really put me onto that bill. You remember we were talking about that months ago, and I love the idea of it, and it is spreading across the country. And but this has been a great session for God in Texas. And when you think about, Tony, putting the 10 commandments in every classroom, there are going to be a lot of young people who are going to look at that and say, teacher, tell me about that. Just tell me about it. What does that mean? And it's going to, I've always thought this has to be tough for kids. When you were growing up and I was growing up, we had prayer in public school and we were able to talk about religion or faith, and then that was taken away. And so here we take our kids and our grandkids to Sunday school or church on Sundays, and then we send them to school, and they have been in the past forbidden to talk about it. And so now we're going to have this little natural connection, I think, between Sunday school, or whether it's a synagogue or a church, whether it's whatever denomination, Baptist or Catholic, it doesn't matter. Students are going to come in and I believe feel more comfortable. And the Democrats who are against this, this battle, Tony, as you know, in this country is not really Republican and Democrat. It's darkness and light. That's what it's all about.
Right.
And there's a big movement in this country that wants to kick God out of the country. Marxist socialist left. That's how they take over a country, break up the family, kick God out, and make government God. And so I'm proud of everyone who's pushing back, and I'm proud of our Texas members who voted for this in both chambers. The book of Jude, which is a very small book, I think it's 600 words, one chapter. It's if you go to the Bible, I know you know where it is. For some of your listeners or viewers, it's the one before Revelations, but it talks about. And Jude, of course, was the half brother of James, who was the brother of Jesus, and he talks about contend earnestly. And most of the other books of the New Testament were really about whether it was Thessalonians or Philippians or Galatians, it was Paul and others talking to non-believers. But in the book of Jude, as you know, it was talking to believers, that you have to contend earnestly. In other words, you have to fight for the faith. And right now, I can tell you in America, those of us who believe in all faiths, we're fighting for our faith, and we're not going to be pushed around anymore.
I think it's commendable, and I want to thank you in your leadership position for doing that. But I would also say this, Governor Patrick, that more people share this concern and a desire to have a moral society than the left wants everyone to believe. That Marxist element is small, vocal, but small. I'm looking at a poll out of Texas voters from Scott Rasmussen regarding 72% of Texas voters believe behavior and discipline in public schools has gotten worse. Yes. 80% would like to see values, moral character based upon biblical truth made available to public school students. So the public is with you in what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, and by the way, we have a new curriculum called Blue Bonnet that we've designed in Texas over the last few years, and it's based on biblical stories because there's so many stories in the Bible that are part of who we are. It doesn't have to be about faith. It's just these wonderful stories, and we're now teaching them in our curriculum. And we give incentives to school districts who take in this curriculum. I think we are now up to about 400 school districts out of our 1,200 or so. So this Blue Bonnet curriculum is another thing that I think will lead the nation. We take great pride as being Texans, and We like to lead. We see good ideas in other states, so we'll take their ideas and incorporate them into ours. But we like to lead, and we have one of the largest. Let me say, I got a note on the question you asked. Senate Bill 1049, the release, just passed the Texas House on third reading today. That's why I did it today with no amendments, so it goes to the governor, Tony. So we made news right here for you.
All right, there we have it, Governor. Thank you for your leadership on that and the 10 Commandments. We're out of time for today, but I look forward to talking to you real soon, once again.
Thank you. I'll see you in D.C.
All right, keep up the great work.